holiday coming up, Halloween. We thought we'd go with something a little along those lines. So Dr. Greg Gerber from UNC Charlotte Physics Department has come out to tell us some true but creepy stories of the real world around us. So perhaps tonight you may leave wondering what crazy and creepy things are around your house and that you're coming into contact with at all times that you had no idea about. So true Halloween stories in our natural world. So let's give a round of applause for Dr. Gerber.
Thank you for having me here. So I'm going to talk about science and horror. I'm actually going to restrict myself a little bit on the subjects I'm going to talk about, and I'll explain why as we go on. But the overall theme of this talk is really just that nature and physical phenomena can be kind of scary. Even though science has taken away a lot of the mystery of the natural world, at the same time we've also learned of even more terrifying things in scientific exploration, discovered things that can also be unsettling. And we have to learn to accept those scary parts of reality, even though they at first frighten us, they also can be fascinating, and we've learned a lot. And one thing that I've noted since I've been writing my blog on science horrors for the past 3 years is that a lot of scientific discoveries have also served as the inspiration for science fiction and horror, and even to the very birth of the genre. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. As an example of some of these connections between fiction and science, one story is by a fellow named E.F. Benson, who's very well known for telling ghost stories. He's one of the classic ghost authors of the late 1800s. One of his stories is called The Horror Horde. It's sort of loosely based on the Matterhorn in Switzerland. And the story is about a fellow who meets an evolutionary throwback, a savage, primitive beast that chases him around. So it's very clearly derived from this idea of growing awareness people have evolutionary theory science. A fathomless bestiality modeled the slavering mouth and the narrow eyes. I looked into the abyss itself and knew that out of that abyss, on which I lean, generations of men had climbed. So we see a lot of interplay and inspiration that authors have drawn from science. Another very famous example is H.P. Lovecraft, who founded the genre of cosmic horror, the idea that mankind is sort of an insignificant speck in an uncaring universe. But he was drawing a lot from Einstein's special and general relativity. In fact, he attended a lot of lectures on physics. So some of his stories draw on those ideas from Einstein's relativity that space and time can be warped. In his story, The Call of Cthulhu, he talks about how there's these crazily elusive angles of carbon rock, this idea that when you look at something, where the second glance showed concavity after the first showed convexity. And this is something that fascinates me. I'm a scientist, I'm also a fan of horror. So I really love this interplay. And there's a lot I can tell you about. Some of the things I can tell you about were already given in the trivia. Hopefully we'll hear a bit more about that at the end. But there's a lot of things that are kind of freaky in science and nature. One of the things that freaked me out from a very young age is this idea that's now called spaghettification. And this picture comes from an Isaac Asimov book from 1978, a kid's book, How Did We Find Out About Black Holes? And that book, and probably this picture itself, probably inspired me in a large part to get involved in science. The idea here is that when you get really near a black hole, the gravitational forces get stronger much quicker the closer you get to the object. So when you get really close to a black hole, the force on your feet can be much, much stronger than the force on your head. So even though you're being pulled towards the black hole, your feet get pulled a lot faster, which gives you this sort of freaky image they put in the book. The reality is you would never stretch like that. I wouldn't even say how horribly it would be to be pulled apart, but this sort of image is sort of the sort of thing that fascinates me. And there are other things I can talk about, like in 2012, researchers discovered in Peru a spider. You can see the spider here, you can see at the top there, that has a really weird habit. It actually builds decoy spiders. And people have seen spiders build decoys in their webs before, but in 2012, this is the first time that they realized this spider is actually adding legs to this thing. It's actually making itself look, it's making this decoy look like another spider, which is kind of unsettling to think of spiders having that much ability to I don't know if they consciously recognize it or not, but they have an ability to have some artistic skills. Fortunately, this spider is only 5 millimeters in length, so you don't really have to worry about it too much. But what I want to really talk about here, I said there's a lot of things I could tell you about that are sort of freaky, but what I really want to focus on tonight are more human stories, stories that involve people. And because I can tell you about creepy animals, freaky physics, horrifying experiments, unexplained phenomena, but the most interesting stories I find are ones that involve people. Those are the ones that often play out more like a ghost story or a horror story or something. And one of the overall themes you can come up with in such a talk is you can realize from these stories that when you don't know about science, it can be very dangerous, sometimes catastrophically and tragically so. Well, one thing I should mention, I'm going to tell stories about very big tragedies in science where a lot of people have died. I don't mean to, and I don't intend to make light of the tragedies that happen, but there are things we can learn from, and it also helps put in perspective how freaky the world can be if we don't know enough about it. And along those lines also, though, we'll also see that sometimes scientists really step in the path of danger to try and stop other things like this from happening. And whether we like it or not, these sort of things are always around us and affecting us, so we better learn as much about the world as we can and how it works. Now, the first story I'd like to tell, I only learned about this one recently, though it's a very old story, is about an event that happened in England in a place called Whitcomb on the Moor. And it's a very historical place. This is a modern picture, but it probably looked the same those 400-something years ago. And this church is still standing that was part of this event. And what happened on October 21st of 1638, the parishioners had gathered on a Sunday for their Sunday service. And as they were praying, there was a massive thunderstorm that emerged. And I quote from a tract that was written after the fact about this. And you can see it's written in very old English. The darkness increasing yet more until they could not in the interim see one another. It got so dark outside that they couldn't even see what they were doing inside the church. And this became a disaster because it was a terrible thunderstorm. And lightning struck the church, and here's also direct quotes from this event. And in addition, some said they saw at first a great ball of fire coming through the window and pass through the church, which nowadays we would call ball lightning. And I'll say a little bit about ball lightning as we go on. But the congregation fell upon their knees on their faces on the floor, and they hid for salvation. It was a devastating strike. In fact, I don't think I've ever read a story of a more devastating lightning strike. And as we now know about electricity and how it works, it can be very precocious, perhaps is a word to use, that it follows whatever path is most convenient to get from one place to another. So the minister of the parish noted that nothing happened to him. He was just standing there. He was fine. The woman next to him was burned, and her clothes were pretty much blasted off of her. I drew this GIF off the internet to just show that sort of phenomenon about how arbitrary lightning can be. This is a situation in South Africa in 2011, a soccer match. It's a repeating loop. But as it starts again, the guys are all playing, there's a flashing moment, and half the players fall down. And as far as I can tell, and the other players don't even notice, they keep playing. Lightning struck a rail on the side of the stadium, and those players who apparently were still standing on the ground were not in mid-stride, got knocked over. The others kept going for a while until somebody blew a whistle. So lightning in this form, this is an example, and everybody here was fine. Lightning in that form can be very, very tricky. Now, this is where the story seems very horrifying. These are original woodcuts from back in the day. It really does sound like something out of a horror novel. One fellow tried to flee out of the church. His dog ran out before him, and apparently there was residual electricity. His dog was struck down, and he stayed inside a little longer. He didn't want to get involved. And another fellow, and this just creeped me out the first time I read this. People realized one guy was missing, and they didn't know where he was, and they saw him still in the church. He looked like he was sleeping. No, he'd been struck down. He was a goner. And in fact was missing part of his head in such a violent accident. So this was a very traumatic event. And it became actually somewhat legendary, though in that day, people didn't know anything about lightning or electricity in the least. So you might expect at least 4 people died and 60 were injured, though the explanation of it that came out later was that, well, this was probably because there were guys playing cards during the church service. Which I guess sounds reasonable in the 1630s. And if you look at it, and this was another interesting fact I learned about churches and thunderstorms back in the day, that back in the Middle Ages, being a church bell ringer was probably one of the more dangerous jobs you could have, because there's a thunderstorm, your church steeple is literally the highest point in the area, and lightning is most likely going to strike that than anything else. And they would actually, St. Thomas Aquinas told people that if you ring church bells, that'll disperse the lightning. So they would always send these church bell ringers up into the towers to ring the bells to scare away the lightning. And during one 35-year period, some 400 churches were struck and more than 100 bell ringers were killed in the process. Which, like I said, is a bit ghastly. But let's get to a bit of the turnaround. The turnaround for this was, in fact, Benjamin Franklin. In the 1750s, starting in 1748, Benjamin Franklin started working with electricity, and eventually he proposed the idea of a lightning rod. He said, hey, you put a big metal rod up on your building. Well, actually, what he thought it would do was it would dissipate the lightning, and you would never experience a lightning strike at all. What in fact happens is the lightning just follows the rod to the ground. But nevertheless, this was a very important discovery. It kind of mostly ended the danger that we experienced from tall buildings and lightning. Franklin's idea of a lightning rod was first confirmed in France by a fellow named Balibar. And Franklin himself was trying to get a lightning rod put on his local church, but he got impatient because he wanted to try this out himself. So this is what led to Franklin's infamous or famous kite experiment. That he really just wanted to test this theory out. So he went out before a thunderstorm and confirmed, yeah, he was drawing down electricity, and it was very likely that he didn't reach a very bad end of the process. Now, the discovery of a lightning rod, well, it saved a lot of people, but some other people were worse off, because researchers started building lightning rods in their homes so they could draw down electricity and study it. One person, literally the year after Franklin's discovery, 1753, he had a lightning rod in his home, and a storm was coming, so he rushed home to see what electricity he could draw. And in fact, this picture makes it a little hard to see, but he was struck by ball lightning, and he was killed by it. And this was sort of a first scientific fatality due to the study of lightning and electricity. The interesting thing about ball lightning is that we still don't really know what it is. If you go from Whitcomb on the border today, it's almost 400 years. And most of that time, since the beginning of science, we've been pretty convinced that ball lightning exists. But it's such a rare phenomenon, we never have an opportunity to study it. And it's only in very recent years that people have started to understand what it is. Some researchers in Brazil in 2010 were able to generate these electrical sparking balls, relatively small. You can see it going under wires and stuff, but then they bounce around and they move around very much like ball lightning. And they did this by basically electrifying chunks of silica, like sand, and creating these balls. And so the prevalent theory now is that lightning strikes somewhere and it sort of superheats and creates this plasma ball of silicon that can then move around and cause all this. But I think it's very interesting. It shows some of the challenges in science, especially when you're dealing with extremely rare phenomena. Often you don't actually know, you don't have enough information to figure out what's going on. Well, I set up this talk to sort of transition smoothly between topics. You guys will have to tell me how well I transition in the end. But as long as we're talking about electricity, around the early 1800s, another electrical fad came up, and that's what's called galvanism, discovered by Luigi Galvani. Galvanism was this observation that deceased, non-living body parts, originally frogs' legs and other things, can be stimulated to move by electrical charges. And this was really the first discovery that the human body that its motion is of a very electrical nature. One of my favorite examples of this was a Dr. Andrew Urey in 1818, who did an experiment. People would do these public experiments. They get a criminal, deceased criminal, and they put him in a big room with a bunch of spectators and then just zap him with electricity. And for instance, and this is a quote from it, every muscle, when the supraorbital nerve was excited, every muscle in his countenance was thrown into fearful action. Rage, horror, despair, anguish. So his face was making all these motions. And back in the day, everybody thought that he was literally bringing this guy back to life. So you read at the end, at this period, several of the spectators were forced to leave from terror or sickness, and one gentleman fainted. Now, to carry on with saying how this connects with horror, of course, you may be familiar with Mary Shelley and her famous novel Frankenstein, which was actually written in 1816 and was kind of at that height of Galvanism. And Mary Shelley wrote the novel Frankenstein, in which a monster is created using electricity, inspired by Galvani's work. Now, what's really interesting about Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, she wrote this story when she was kind of having a summer with Percy Shelley, who would eventually be her husband, John Polidori, and Lord Byron. The weekend was very stormy. It was not a weekend like you'd have a summer in Geneva. It was very gloomy and cloudy and miserable. And so they got bored, so this is what made them write stories. So we can thank Frankenstein for the fact, we can thank the gloomy weather for the existence of the story of Frankenstein. But that gloomy weather also had a scientific basis. The year before, in 1815, on April 10, on the island of Sumbawa, Indonesia, a volcanic mountain, Mount Tambora, blew up. And it's quite amazing. This was the biggest volcanic eruption in recorded human history. We know there have been bigger ones. We actually know there are going to be bigger ones eventually still. We try not to think about that too much. But this chart here, which I dragged off the internet, shows sort of the relative scales of volcanic eruptions. Mount St. Helens in 1980, a sphere of roughly 1 kilometer cube of material was ejected from the mountain. Mount Pinatubo in 1991 had 10 cubic kilometers, 10 times as much material. Well, Mount Tambora in 1815 had 10 times even more. 100 cubic kilometers of stuff was ejected out of the mountain during the eruption. And it was equivalent to an 800 megaton explosion. And for comparison, the biggest nuclear blast that human beings have ever achieved was the Soviets' Tsar Bomba, which was 50 megatons. So we're on a completely different scale. What Mount Tambora did is it sent this huge ash cloud up into the atmosphere. And that ash cloud blocked sunlight that lowered global temperatures. And the year 1816 later became known as the year without a summer, or also was referred to as 1800 and froze to death. People would go out in the summer, find that their laundry they left out to dry and instead frozen solid. And it was this event that led to Mary Shelley being stuck indoors and writing Frankenstein. Well, Tambora itself is very interesting, and it'll lead into my next topic as well, that at the time, this was 1815, information did not travel very fast. It wasn't really any telegraph or anything, so months would go by before most of the world would hear about this. So really the only source of information we have about the eruption of Tambora was from the lieutenant governor of Java at the time, who managed to collect this narrative from locals about what they saw and what they experienced. And incidentally, it's sort of interesting that Java was long a Dutch colony, but in 1811, Napoleon seized it, and it took it over. But that immediately led, because Napoleon was at war with the British immediately stole it from him. So it ended up being a British colony for this short period of time when the mountain erupted. And I find it very creepy because the narrative he gives eyewitness accounts from very far away, getting closer and closer to the mountains. You start seeing how things get worse and worse the closer you are. And just to highlight, being the way I am, I went and found Google Maps, and I went and figured out where all of these original cities were in comparison with the mountains, and I could chart it all out and see the progression. In the town of Bresci, which was probably 300 miles away, well, the morning of the 12th, they came out and found that there was a cloud of ash descending, and they ended up breakfasting by candlelight at 11 a.m. because it was so dark out. You go to Sumanap, which is probably 50 or 70 miles closer, and they could hear the explosions from the mountain. They were very loud, and it sounded like nearby cannon. This is how powerful the eruption was that hundreds of miles away, people thought they were hearing cannon fire. And there was also a rush of water from the bay that came back. These were small tsunamis from the eruption. And you go even further, and you find that when you get to Banyuwangi, if I'm saying that correctly, which I think is a great name, you find that the eruptions made even more noise, and the ashes were falling like fine snow, and they were ½ an inch deep on the ground. And if you get to the mountain itself, you find that the devastation there was appalling. At 7 p.m. on the 10th of April, 3 distinct columns of flame burst forth from the mountain. In a short time, the whole mountain next to Sauror, which was a little village below it, appeared like a body of liquid fire extending itself in every direction. These are all the original documents, incidentally, the original descriptions. And the fire and columns of flame, this is what Tambora looks like today, continued to rage into the darkness. And the amazing thing about this description is, in the part of the Sagor joining Tambora, the effects of a violent whirlwind were violent, tore by the roots the largest trees, and carried them into the air together with men, houses, cattle, just took everything with it, beyond anything that a hurricane would even do at that point. It was quite a powerful event. Now, from those descriptions, though, you'll notice that you don't get really much information. It doesn't really tell you much about what that volcano is doing and what it's all about. And I'll tell you about one more tragedy, and then I'll actually try and get some not quite so tragic things before you all leave me. But so volcanologists, the knowledge about volcanoes was very limited, and this became a very tragic state of affairs in 1902. On the island of Martinique, there's a volcano called Mount Pelée, and there's a town, Saint Pierre, that's about a ½ a mile, by my estimate, from the mountain. And in April of 1902, Mount Pelée started to show signs of eruption. And Saint Pierre is a town of 28,000 people. Well, the mountain started to make very ominous sounds and very ominous noises. It was starting to look really bad. Large clouds of rocks and ash were emitted. Rivers from the mountain swelled and were carrying boulders downstream. There were ash and earthquakes and loud explosions. And on May 5th, some small tsunami waves actually hit the city and washed parts of it, flooded parts of the city. And the thing is, though, some people fled the city. Some people were like, that's it, I'm out of here. But unfortunately, there were a lot of people that lived even closer to the mountain, so those people moved into the city. And with the flux of refugees, eventually, there was about 30,000 people in the town. Now, this is a little fact and a story of a guy who survived that day, which leads me to a principle I made up that I named after myself. It's humbling. But a fellow named Ferdinand Clerc, on the morning of May 8th, he awoke to prepare for church. And we had a little weather station there, and as every day he'd get up and check his little weather station with its barometer and its thermometer to see what kind of day it's going to be. And on this day, he went to his barometer, which measures pressure, and he heard a strange burping sound from the volcano. When he looked at his barometer, the needle was oscillating wildly. The pressure was going. And as this book that I quote from says, he wasn't sure what to make of it all, but he knew it wasn't a good moment. Basically, he had about 20 guests staying at his house at the time in the city. He woke everybody up. He said, "Get out of here as fast as you can." He grabbed his family and his servants, and they left, and they fled. And this leads into my principle that I call the worst principle, because nobody else bothered to think of anything. But if you ever see nature doing something really freaky that it shouldn't, you should just run. That's sort of the process. That's sort of the phenomenon that you should keep in mind. If you see your barometer doing that, see if you can figure out what's making it do that, and go away from it. Because what ended up happening to Mount Pelée is at 8 a.m., it exploded and emitted what we call pyroclastic flows. And a pyroclastic flow is a superheated gas and ash mixed together. And these pyroclastic flows were particularly devastating because typically what happens with a pyroclastic flow or often is they sort of go up and then gravity carries them down the mountain. In this case, one exploded horizontally right towards the city of St. And it was moving, they estimated later, at about 120 miles an hour. And it was, the temperature in it was between 700 and 1300 degrees where you were. And this is an image from Mount Sinabung in Indonesia in 2013. Now, the most serious slide I have to say is the town of St. Pierre was completely and utterly destroyed. We have a before picture and we have an after picture. And pretty much entirely wiped out off the map. There were some survivors, three people in the entire city. Two of them were actually near the outskirts of the city. The third one is actually an interesting case. Louis Augustus Separus was actually in prison. He got in a bar brawl the night before, and they threw him in this tiny bomb shelter-like cell, which probably would have been considered a very big punishment, but in fact, that saved his life. He was basically in a bomb shelter when he was a kid. Well, he managed to make good on this. Barnum and Bailey Circus thought that this was a great guy who they billed as the only living object to survive in the city of death, which, as I said, wasn't quite true. And they named him Ludger Sabaris, which also wasn't quite true. But he apparently did quite well for himself, going on tour with the Barnum and Bailey show and telling his story of survival. Okay, if I give this talk, it's a lot darker than I really hoped it would be, but we're getting past that now. We're getting into kind of, in a sense, fighting back to some extent. The thing about Mount Pelée is it really, a lot of people blamed the governor, who actually died in the city, for not getting people evacuated. But the reality is, nobody knew a volcano could do such a thing at that time. People thought 5 miles away, they thought, well, what does a volcano do? It shoots ash in the air. We can get away from that. It spews lava. Lava moves really slow. We can walk away from that. Nobody knew that it could shoot clouds of ash that quickly. Well, that caught the attention of volcanologists, and this event, though tragic, really spawned the beginning of modern volcanology. This was the beginning of research on volcanoes. People realized there was so much still to learn. And the mountain stopped erupting in 1905 for a bit, though at first it shot this 1,000-foot solid stone needle out, which is again a testament to the powers of the earth below us, which eventually collapsed because it was not really a natural formation. And in late 1929, the mountain started to act up again like it had in 1905, and this time volcanologists were ready and rushed to the scene. And among them was a guy named Frank Parra, who's really sort of an interesting character. He started out as an American inventor and entrepreneur. He built electric motors. Some early model electric motors were designed by Parra. But in 1906, he visited Europe and he saw Mount Vesuvius erupt. That changed his life's course. He suddenly decided he wanted to study volcanoes and understand how they work. And so he studied Mount Vesuvius until 1921. Did other things for a while. When Pelée erupted again in 1929, he rushed to Martinique to study these pyroclastic flows, these superheated ash clouds up close. And he set up a little shack out on the mountain itself. It was on a small hill between two valleys, and he kind of knew that these pyroclastic flows went down these valleys. He was like, well, I'll just be between them and I can see them go on either side. As I said, this was quite frankly kind of crazy. But this was the sort of guy that Parra was. And this sort of caught up with them one day in 1929 when, as he says, this was his own words again, a huge spine had grown up near the west side of the dome. And then it collapsed, and from it poured an ash cloud of inky blackness, expanding upward as it rushed down the slope. And there were two mighty parallel columns, ominous, moving straight towards the station. These were two pyroclastic flows like that, heading right towards it. In his tiny little shack, it was probably a very tiny shack. And I love his description of this. I shall not attempt to describe all the sensations I felt and the thoughts that swept through my mind in that moment. He realized he couldn't run away from this thing, which was probably moving at about 30 miles an hour. And so he decided to risk the protection of the frail shack and stopped up every crack in the doors and windows that he could and waited. Though, being a scientist, he peered out from the rear of the station, couldn't resist one last peek before it hit him. A sublime spectacle, 2 pillars of cloud 1,000 feet in height, apparently gaining in speed every instant, heading straight towards the shelter. Now, to give you an idea of what he might have seen, this is a video of a pyroclastic flow from Unzen volcano in 1991. And so this would be the sort of thing that Frank Parrott would have been seeing, and what a lot of people would see from a pyroclastic flow. And if you're wondering, these people were all okay. This flow actually stopped somewhere about the tree line in this particular video. But so Parrott, the blast was upon him, not a terrific shock, but swirling gusts of ash-laden wind, bringing a pall of darkness. The whole thing lasted for half an hour, but it was nearly an hour before he was relieved by a kindly wind. And he lit a lantern coming outside his door to his shack to let people know that he actually made it through. As I understand it, he stayed on and continued to study the volcano. And nowadays you find that volcanoes are still devastating, but we understand them a lot better. We know what they can do. Situations like Mount St. Helens, the number of people that died was relatively insignificant in comparison. So Parrott's a crazy guy who kind of put his neck in the line to learn something. There are a lot of those. I could have filled an entire talk with just crazy people. I'll even leave out the one about the guy who was eating somebody else's vomit to test theories, which, yeah, I don't know why I even mentioned it. I'm like, this is pretty gross for the talk. I shouldn't really say anything, but you can ask me about that later if you want to know. But let me tell you about another story that just cracked me up. There's a syndrome. It was named Irukandji syndrome. And what happened is in northern Australia, there were swimmers who they thought they were getting stung by something, and there was a delayed reaction. Suddenly they get incredible, debilitating pain. And it could be fatal if you're swimming in the water. People suspected there was some sort of marine animal that was causing this pain, but they didn't know what it was. Well, there was a fellow named Hugo Flecker who studied this, and he studied on the order of 10, 15 years until he passed away. And he gave it the name Irukandji syndrome in the absence of knowledge of the identity of the offending object and any distinctive character about the symptoms. He named it after an Aboriginal tribe in Australia because nobody had any idea what this was. Well, he passed away in 1957, and a medical doctor named Jack Barnes took over. And Barnes spent years trying to hunt down what sort of animal could be causing these very painful stings. He knew it had to be really small because nobody ever saw anything. It also probably be invisible in water. And also, it seemed to be seasonal with the current. Somewhere from like October to May was where people got struck with Irukandji syndrome the most. And he thought it was probably a small jellyfish. In 1961, after years of searching, they finally isolated 2 tiny little jellyfish in a bucket. Well, then what do you do? All right, I've got this jellyfish. Now I got to know if they cause this debilitating illness. Well, you test it on yourself. So, and these are the quotes from Barnes' paper on this. The first one was applied to an adult and to a boy aged 9 with the same last initial as him. Barnes' son, his 9-year-old son, said, yeah, I'll be stung by this potentially fatal jellyfish. And Jack Barnes said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And another lifeguard on hand agreed to also be stung. This just shows how different the standards of child care have changed in the past 40 years or so. But their suspicion proved correct, and fortunately it was not permanently harmful for anybody. They suffered from abdominal pain, muscle spasms, all sorts of problems. Though in full effects did not even dissipate for 24 hours. They suffered from pain. And what they did identify, yeah, that was the guy. A new jellyfish that nobody had seen before, 1.5 inch by 1.5 inches, which was given the name Carnukia barnesi after Jack Barnes, the fellow who discovered it and allowed himself to get stung by it. So a lot of crazy people have kind of stuck their necks out, and their children for some reason, into figuring out dangers. It's not always scientists who discover something, though. This is one of my favorite stories of all time. You've all probably heard of the Kraken and releasing the Kraken and so forth. Well, the Kraken has been sort of a legendary creature for hundreds of years. Sailors have always reported seeing giant, monstrous cuttlefish, and people have drawn pictures of it. Now, in the 1850s, a naturalist named Johannes Steenstrup, he noticed too that there were these reports from hundreds of years earlier where people had reported seeing sea monks, aquatic monks. And he drew this picture and said, well, what they're calling a sea monk is probably really a big squid, but they just misidentified the tentacles off to the side, the bottom looks like a robe. So people sort of thought there was a big squid out there, something that could really represent the Kraken, but nobody had ever scientifically investigated this. Well, 1873 rolls around in Newfoundland. In Conception Bay, it's the current picture of Conception Bay, which doesn't look like it's gotten that much more crowded than probably what it looked like in the day. And there was a fisherman, Theophilus Pico, who was out on his fishing boat. And while he was out, he saw some sort of big, definitely living creature floating there. And he had no idea what it was. But it was bigger than his boat. It was longer than his boat. It was a big creature. Now, I think this story encompasses the best and worst of humanity all in one story, because kind of the drive to understand something and the stupidity that comes along with it. Because most of us probably wouldn't think, well, I see this giant creature that's bigger than my boat, what should I do with it? I'll poke it with a stick. So he pokes this giant squid with a stick. Later he claimed it was 60 feet long, which is a little large but not unreasonable. He struck it with his gaff and immediately showed signs of life. He reared a parrot-like beak, which they declared was as big as a 6-gallon keg, which struck the bottom of the boat violently, and it shot its arms out, and wrapped them around the boat, and started to pull the boat underwater. And this is a letter written about this encounter to a Professor Legacy from Mr. Murray. And I found there's this image that came from an 1879 book, obviously inspired by this. Well, fortunately, Pico or somebody else, and it's a little unclear, this is another picture I love. Pico or somebody else grabbed a small axe in the boat and chopped off the arms, or at least one arm. And immediately the fish moved off, and being a squid, it injected a bunch of ink and took off. And so he or others were saved. When you read the original accounts, you find that the story keeps changing. The original account says, well, there was this one guy in this boat, then it became 2 guys in the boat, eventually became 2 guys and Pico's young son in the boat. The young son hacks off the arm. I'm guessing it was probably just one guy, so I'm thinking there were 2 guys. One guy was said to the other guy, why are you poking that giant thing in his stick? But you never know. Watch this. But this close call actually brought the first specimen of a giant squid to be recognized by science to the scientific community. This was a woodcut. Though it turned out it didn't take long for other specimens to arise, giant squid, for reasons that people still don't really know, go through mass beachings about every 60 or so years. There's a large number of them wash up somewhere. Nobody really knows why. And that encounter with Pico was one of the first mass beachings that was ever encountered. And so eventually, this fellow Moses Harvey, who started taking stock of all this, he started collecting these specimens. Here's a giant squid that he found and took a photo of. He draped it over his bath. He had kind of a standing bath. He just took this whole body and piled it over his bath. And so that's become a famous picture. And so we learned, we officially confirmed the existence of giant squid because he poked that thing with a stick. Remarkably, kind of like ball lightning, we still don't know very much about giant squid. We don't think that they typically like to attack people. They're very deep ocean dwellers, so we don't usually see them a lot. It's only in recent years again that we're starting to get more information about them. In 2006, a Japanese research team managed to pull this squid to the surface, and that picture, for some reason, just constantly freaks me out. The eyes of the giant squid are tremendous. The largest specimens, the eyes were as big as dinner plates around. And it was only in 2013 that a healthy giant squid was videoed feeding underwater so that people could actually see what it does and how it does things. I took this from a Discovery Channel special and just made a little animated GIF on it to see it in action. So, and just another one of those things that we're still slowly learning more and more about it. Well, that's a bit, to change tactics a little bit. We're going to show you somebody who deliberately set out to scare people. We've looked at scientists who are trying to stop things from happening. I'm going to show you somebody who actually tried to scare people. Though in a good way, in fact. His name was Etienne Gastonia. And originally, he was born in Belgium. He showed an early interest in electricity and optics, and he was a very smart guy. He also, actually, is kind of like me, so I feel a little kindred spirit with him. He had a fascination with supernatural tales of ghosts, witches, and werewolves. He was interested in spooky stuff as well as science. He got an education in optics, kind of like me, working as a young man with an optical instrument maker, which I do too. And this is the only picture I've been able to find with him. Well, it's kind of a common story of the era. His parents wanted him to become a priest, but he really wanted to go into art and he wanted to go into science. So Monsieur Villette told him, oh, just go to Paris. You can do whatever you want there. So he went to Paris in 1789. It was actually a bad time to be there because the French Revolution was just starting. But he managed to make do. He actually tutored nobility and he took physics lectures and he learned a lot more along the way. And he was a very inventive guy. Have you all heard of Archimedes' legendary burning mirror or death ray? They've tested it on Mythbusters about a dozen times at this point. Well, there's this idea that Archimedes was able to arrange a bunch of mirrors to set things on fire from a distance. Well, that story fascinated people even back in the 1700s, and Robert, he actually built a prototype. When he took it to the French scientists in Paris, they said, that's great, we'll get back to you. They never got back to him. And while he was waiting for them to reply, he thought for sure riches and fame would be his. He started developing a supernatural light and optics show. He started saying, well, it'd be fun, I could use all these optical tricks I've learned to entertain and scare people. He took the stage name Robertson. And what he invented is now called Phantasmagoria. And he did his first show in January of 1798. And he really freaked out his audience. This is an image from the interior of his book, sort of showing idealized what the hysteria looked like at one of his early shows. You've got people screaming, people crying, people drawing their swords. I've never been quite sure if this is supposed to be Robertson pointing at things or whether it's a guy with a gun trying to shoot them. But he created an immense sensation in Paris. People went crazy over his show. Just to give you one quote, that one of the things he showed was a beautiful woman floating in the air, her hair floating about her, appearing and smiling at a young man in the audience. And a brave-looking individual sitting close by me explained, "Is my wife come to life again?" He rushed from the room. So he assumed that something was going on was real. Now you might ask, how is it that easy to fool people? Well, Robertson did a number of clever tricks. He was not just the person who knew some science, he was very good at stagecraft. Well, one thing, he was using what we call a magic lantern. What was called a magic lantern at the time. What we call it nowadays would be an overhead projector, like what I'm using to display this talk. And obviously this doesn't look very scary. But one of the things Robertson realized is, well, if you project an image on a white background, it's not very scary. If you project it on a black background, now it looks scary. Now it looks like something floating in space. And then he also, instead of projecting it on a wall, he projected it on a screen so that this image would look like it was floating in the air in front of you. Now, as time progressed, he also realized, and other people realized, you could make crude animations out of it. So you could design these magic lanterns that had multiple lenses, so you could switch and you could make an image change and make it look alive. Very crude early form of cinematography. And Robertson patented his own version of what he called a phantasm. And one of the things he did is he just put it on wheels. And And then they seem like not a big deal, except when you move the thing, if you have the thing very close to the screen and then you move it away, the image gets really big really fast. So you can start with this tiny little image, like what's that? And this demon head comes leaping out at you. And you can scare people like that. And he also knew that the setting and the atmosphere was important, so he moved his shows into a decaying, abandoned convent as well. So it's a decaying room. He probably didn't fix anything up either, so it looked like a place where ghosts would be staying. Well, here's some of the slides. There's this lovely website I found that actually had reproductions of some of his original slides. He drew all his own slides too. He was a very good artist. And so you have people like Napoleon, creepy guy with a knife, skeletons, demons, and the two in the middle, which are coffins, which could spring open and reveal ghosts inside. And if it still doesn't seem scary, you should keep in mind that he would hire ventriloquists who would make screams at the appropriate time to startle the audience even more. And he was very successful at this. He made a lot of money. He also ended up with a lot of people stealing his ideas. It was very much, this was an early example of how the entertainment industry gets very cutthroat, because as soon as he came out with this, thousands of people across Europe started copying him, and soon he was starting to struggle to survive with his original idea. But the other thing I should say about Robertson is he didn't just scare people or try and convince them that he had ghosts. This was a scientific show. He would start his show and say, look, I'm going to start talking like I'm a sorcerer, but remember, nothing I'm showing you is actually real. This is all just an optics demonstration. Don't forget that when I start talking to you like I'm some sort of wizard. So he really was a very good scientist and educator of the public on scientific phenomena. Of course, nowadays, movies and optics are fundamental in our entertainment industry. One other sort of unsettling story I like to tell about this is really a mystery. It kind of freaks me out because of how little is known. Cinematography really started in roughly the 1870s. A fellow named Edward Mordridge took the first sequence of still photos of a horse galloping in motion. Now, he didn't have any way of showing this in animation, so this was done much later by somebody on the internet, but those images solved a long-standing controversy about animal motion. People weren't sure until we had this image whether a horse, when it galloped, would pick up all its feet when it went, or whether it always had 2 feet on the ground. And Voyridge's photos showed that the horse brings all its legs together and is actually all completely off the ground when it's galloping. In 1882, another personal hero of mine, Etienne Jules Marie, created his own chronophotographic gun. He did a lot of studies of animals, and one thing he did was this great image of a cat being released upside down and twisting over and landing on its feet. A little fun fact, when he first showed this image to the Paris Academy of Sciences, some of the people present said, if what you say is true, these cats are violating fundamental laws of physics. They quickly walked that back, but this image was surprisingly shocking, and movies were really a game changer. Being able to take high-speed photos was really a big deal. But neither of these were motion pictures. These were just sequences of photographs that people could look at. Now, in 1888, another Frenchman, Louis Leprince, he actually filmed the very first moving picture with a single lens, so all the images were being taken through the same optical system, and with a paper film that could be scrolled to really make a moving picture. This first film is not terribly exciting. It's 3 seconds long. I didn't just sample it. That's literally as long as it is, called The Round-Pea Artisan. But he was the first person to make a moving picture that could then be projected back to an audience. In 1890, he was way ahead of his competitors. You probably are familiar with his main competitor, Thomas Edison, who was also rushing to try and make moving pictures. And Leprince had plans to travel to the United Kingdom to get a patent for his inventions, and from there he's going to go to the United States to promote his moving pictures. He was on track to be the head guy in cinematography. He should be the father of motion picture technology. On September 16th, he boarded a train from Paris to France, where he'd been visiting his brother. and he was never seen again. He disappeared. His friends were waiting for him at the train station in Paris. He never arrived. His luggage was never seen again. Now, it's a standard missing person sort of story, but it's sort of shocking to think about it because, well, people thought that he committed suicide, and it seems unlikely in a successful business. There was complaints that maybe he just went into hiding, he just disappeared from the earth because a scandal was about to break, but no scandal ever appeared. The creepy thing is realizing that with him disappearing, Thomas Edison was the only person ahead in filmmaking. He patented the kinetograph in 1891 with no opposition. And Edison, if you read about him, was a pretty ruthless inventor. He was a very talented guy, but pretty ruthless. And I didn't even write anything up there to say that Edison had a hand in this, but it's just one of those things that makes you wonder. The entire history of the film industry would be different if Louis Le Prince hadn't vanished. And these sort of stories kind of make a difference. It shows you how the history of science and technology can really change, and it's really based on individuals. Now, I have one other story to tell you, and this is pretty much the most ghost story-like story I'll tell you about. And it's set in Lake Crescent, Washington. It's the northwest corner of Washington State, entirely within Olympic National Park. It's a pretty remote area. It's got a couple of towns somewhat far away. There's one town, Piedmont, on its northern tip. The next largest one is miles away. This is an image of Lake Crescent, very remote. It was carved by glaciers. It's a very cold old glacier lake. It has depth. Some parts are probably deeper than 1,000 feet. So things that go to the bottom of Lake Crescent don't usually come back. Yeah, they disappear. And the lake has a reputation for tragedy. In 1929, Russell and Blanche Warren were going home along the lake road with a new washing machine they bought at the store, and they never got home. It was only in 2001 that divers tried to solve this mystery, were diving in the lake, and they think they found the lid of the washing machine. In 2002, they think they found the car. No sign of any human remains, so you wouldn't necessarily expect there to be. In the 1960s, an ambulance crashed to the lake about the same region. The medics got out, but the logger who they were transporting to the hospital did not. So the lake has a reputation for being a very creepy, even haunted place. But no story is kind of creepier than the story of Hallie Ladham Illing. She was born in 1901, and she was born in Kentucky. She moved gradually west. She first ended in Port Angeles, the city further away from Lake Crescent, and eventually ended up working at the Lake Crescent Tavern as a barmaid. Well, December 22nd, 1937, she disappeared. She married Monty Illingworth in June of 1936. They had a very turbulent marriage. And in the early morning of December 22nd, 1937, she vanished. Her husband said, I'm pretty sure she ran off with a sailor from Alaska, but she never talked to any family members again. And so people were very suspicious, but there was no evidence of what had happened. And these are all vintage photos of Lake Crescent from back in the day. Well, in 1940, years later, two fishermen spotted an object floating in the water. It was a body wrapped in blankets and tied with a rope. And what they found, to quote a book on the subject, before them lay a fully formed body of a woman in the mid-30s. But it was a different body. It wasn't decomposing, it hadn't decomposed at all. And a doctor investigated said, I never saw a body like this one. The flesh is hard, almost waxy. She must be nearly as large as when she went into the water. She was remarkably well preserved. In fact, she was more like a statue. Her flesh had turned into some sort of rubber-like substance. And they were rather baffled by this. But this is a process. It's a process called saponification. It turns out that, well, when her body obviously went into the water, the cold water in the lake prevented her from decomposing. And there were salts and calcium in the water. That saponification is basically the process in which human body fat turns into soap, or a soap-like substance. And if you've seen the movie Fight Club, you know that human fat is great for making soap out of. So this idea of saponification is not necessarily so surprising. And as I said, it's not much different from ivory soap. And what ivory soap does, it floats. So her body, which was no doubt weighted down and sunk into the lake, eventually the things holding it down broke and she floated to the surface where she was discovered. And the body was still not in good enough condition to make a positive identification just on the appearance, but her dental records were found and confirmed it was actually her, it was Holly. And her husband Monty was caught up with in Long Beach in 1941. And he was found guilty of murder in 1942 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Met justice. And very much, this is about as close to a real ghost story as I think you can get. In the fact that from beyond the grave, in a sense, the wife came back to exact some sort of vengeance. He was paroled 9 years later. I don't know whatever happened to him after that. I found no record of what happened. And I'd like to give a shout out to an acquaintance of mine. I first learned the story of the Lady of the Lake from an author named Laird Barron, who's probably one of the best authors of horror fiction alive today. Laird Barron used to live off of Lake Crescent. And he wrote a story called The Redfield Girls, which is a beautifully creepy story about the lake that first appeared in this compilation and then appeared in his own collection. So I'd like to give a tip of the hat to Laird Barron because I would not have known that story at all if I had not read Laird Barron's work. But connected to this, there's one more thing I want to tell you about before I finish. And that's a little brief story about a mummy. And the long story about this mummy is that in 600 BCE, there was an Egyptian noblewoman named Nitirietsu. She died, she was mummified, she was buried in the Theban necropolis in Egypt. In 1819, Sir Archibald Edmonston purchased the body, brought it to England. And in 1821, a scientist named Sir Augustus Granville convinced Sir Archibald to donate the body to science. And Granville then performed an autopsy on the body, a full examination, trying to understand the mummification process. And he presented his full studies of the mummy in a nighttime meeting of the Royal Society in 1925. But during his autopsy, he found scented wax on the mummy that he assumed was part of the mummification process. And so he thought, oh, I got this cool wax, it would be a really neat trick to make candles out of this wax to light my presentation. Well, in fact, he was using the saponified body fat of the mummy. And so he gave his entire presentation burning with the scent of saponified body fat floating in the air. And with that, I should probably shut off my candles. And I will end there. Thank you very much.
Probably lots of weird things going on in your head right now.
Is St. Elmo's fire the same as ball lightning?
That's a good question. Is the St. Elmo's fire the same as ball lightning? I'm not sure off the top of my head. St. Elmo's fire, typically, that's what manifests at the top of ship masts. I think it's a distinct phenomenon. It has to do, if I remember St. Elmo's fire, it has to do with the fact that it's kind of related in the sense that it's very much like a lightning rod. That you have this ship, you end up during a storm or some sort of situation where you've got an electric potential difference between the bottom of the boat and the top of the boat. And so any channel like the mast of the ship becomes a conduit, even a poor one, that can draw electricity or manifest. You end up with electrical manifestation up there, but not exactly ball lightning. Other question? Yeah.
So what's the vomit story?
What's that?
What's
the vomit story? Oh yeah. Fellow named, I'll tell it without going into too much detail. Actually, detail for all of it. So I hope everybody's done eating. There's a fellow named Stubborn's Firth. This was about the 1700s. During an outbreak of yellow fever, Stubborn's Firth was a medical doctor. He became convinced that yellow fever was not a contagious disease. It did not